Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Just following up on the speech of Minister Lawrence Wong pertaining to government surpluses, I noted in my speech that at this current point, the government has slightly in excess of $15 billion in accumulated surpluses. And the Minister was speaking of a debate we had when the NIRC formula was amended to include Temasek. In that debate, if I remember correctly, the reasons given for the change was higher expenditure on healthcare, higher expenditure on aging, and infrastructure development. Just to get a sense of the government's plans in future, given the accumulated surpluses in hand, largely I would believe as a result of Temasek's inclusion, do we have some understanding of what new projects or even endowments will be created by the government for the years to come?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, when Mr. Pritam Singh referred to the surpluses this year, I think we have made very clear during the budget and in the budget debate that these were exceptional items, one-off items, and should not be extrapolated. They were specific to certain contributions from MAS, which we have explained. Through the rest of the term, I think the Minister for Finance during the budget debate has made clear, and I'll repeat that, we believe that we have just enough resources to cover government needs for this term of government. But beyond this term of government, we know that expenditures will continue to rise. There's no doubt that healthcare spending will rise. There's no doubt about that. It's indisputable because the population is aging, and it will rise very sharply. So on healthcare alone, the increase is significant, and we have to cater for this. On the revenue side, if you look at our revenues, there's a part of them that are linked to income and taxation, largely to the economy, but we know that the economy is not going to grow in the same way that it used to in the past. Growth is moderating, and so revenues from these different taxation sources will moderate too. Then we have NIRC. This is already the single largest item in our revenue source today. We do not, NIRC as a percentage of GDP will continue to provide us a steady stream of revenues for the future. But we do not expect that to increase as a percentage of GDP. It will just provide a steady, constant stream of revenue as a percentage of GDP. We do not expect that to go up. In fact, there is a risk that it may even come down. Why? Because if you look at the trends around in the asset markets today, interest rates are at historically low levels. If you look at equity valuations, they are highly elevated. So there is a risk that long-term asset returns may be lower in the future. So if you look at this overall picture, spending beyond the term of government going up, inexorable, clearly going to happen, revenue uncertain, if anything, more downside risks than before, then I think you will appreciate that our fiscal position is in fact not that strong, and we need to take steps to further strengthen it.
Mr. Leon Pereira.
Thank you, sir. I thank the Honourable Minister, Mr. Lawrence Wong, for your comments and references. Just 2 points of clarification for the Minister. Firstly, in view of the likely future changes in the demographic makeup of Singapore, the size of our reserves, the needs of our society and our population, will the government not, at some point in the future, and I know that it's hard to specify when, will the government not consider evolving the position on the treatment of reserves in line with the changing of conditions, or is it something that is set in stone and cannot be changed? That's my first point of clarification. The second point for the Minister, would the Minister acknowledge that there are costs on the other side of the equation? The more future governments have to raise things like GST, the more that raises economic pressure and potentially anxieties experienced by Singaporeans, and the more that can affect other things which are important for the country and also important for economic growth, like TFR, which I think, as we've said, is an existential issue for Singapore, like entrepreneurship, like risk-taking, long terms of innovation and things like that. And if we give more room to those things, might there also not be the possibility that these things could raise economic growth and therefore raise revenue further down the line? Thank you.
Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, sir, I've learned in government to say never. As I mentioned earlier, we are prepared to listen to different views. We are prepared to listen to different proposals. And when these proposals come, we will always be prepared to review our policies. But my point on the NIRC rules is this, that this was debated at length only not too long ago. We went through this discussion in this House, debated thoroughly the points, and we settled on a framework that we think best meets the needs of both current and future generations and balances that fairly. And we decided to enshrine these rules in the Constitution. Let's not be so quick to rush the minute we need money and say, can we tweak the rules again? So that's on the first point. On the second point, would cost of government impose a drag on the economy? Yes, for sure it will. If the government budget, which means the revenues that we need to collect to meet the budget, balloons to 25% of GDP, 30% of GDP, 40% of GDP in some European countries, for sure it will be a drag on the economy. So what I would very much like to hear from members of this House, if you think that this is a concern, please let us have proposals not to spend more, which we keep hearing, but to spend less for a change.